It took exactly 27 seconds for my entire world to collapse. 27 seconds of my brother's voice, accidentally sent to my phone instead of our mother's, revealing a decade of calculated betrayal. I stood frozen in my Chicago office, the city lights blurring through tears. I didn't know I was crying, and realized that everything I had sacrificed, every time I had stepped back to let him shine, this had been part of his plan all along. My name is Sarah Elise Morgan, though everyone calls me Elise. I'm 32 years old, a junior architect at Morrison and Blake in downtown Chicago, and until that Tuesday evening in late September, I genuinely believed my family loved me. Not in the showy, Instagram-perfect way, but in the quiet, dependable way that small-town Virginia families are supposed to love each other. I was wrong about so many things. The voicemail arrived at 6:47 p.m. I was hunched over my desk, eyes burning from staring at AutoCAD renderings for the Riverside Development Project, our firm's biggest commission in 5 years. My phone buzzed. I saw David's name and smiled reflexively. My older brother didn't call often, usually just quick texts about mom's doctor appointments or utility bills that needed attention. I tapped the voicemail icon absently, expecting maybe a reminder about mom's upcoming cardiology visit or a request to split the cost of her new prescription. Instead, I heard this. "Mom, I've told you before, Sarah is too careless and unreliable. If you want to protect your assets, you need to transfer everything to me. I'll manage it all. She doesn't have the capacity." His voice carried that smooth, persuasive tone he used in sales meetings, the one that had made him Employee of the Year at his pharmaceutical company 3 years running. But there was something else underneath it, something cold and calculating that I had never heard directed at me before. Or maybe I had heard it, but had trained myself not to recognize it. I played the message again, and again. Each time, the knife twisted deeper. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on my desk. The glass and steel skyline of Chicago stretched before me through the floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent and glittering, and I caught my reflection in the dark glass. My face looked pale, almost ghostly, with shadows under my eyes that I hadn't noticed before. I looked like a stranger. Sarah is too careless and unreliable. The words echoed in my skull like a mantra I had been unknowingly reciting my entire life. Every time I had doubted myself, every time I had checked and rechecked my work, every time I had apologized for existing too loudly in spaces David occupied, this is what I had been preparing for. This moment of absolute, crushing clarity. I grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, in a modest colonial house with azalea bushes that my father planted before he died when I was 7. David was 4 years older, a golden child who seemed to glow with some internal light that drew people to him like moths. He was quarterback of the James River High School football team, prom king, voted most likely to succeed. Teachers loved him, neighbors loved him. Our mother, Helen Morgan, a retired elementary school teacher, worshipped him. I was the quiet one. The one who brought home straight A's that were met with a distracted, "That's nice, dear," while David's B+ in history warranted a celebration dinner at Mario's Italian restaurant. I was the one who spent Friday nights at the library, while David threw legendary parties that the whole school talked about for weeks. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that academic success was its own reward, that I didn't need the spotlight. I told myself so many lies. After I graduated from Virginia Tech with a degree in architecture, I moved to Chicago for an entry-level position that paid barely enough to cover rent in a studio apartment in Logan Square. I was 23, thrilled to be in a big city, ready to build a career. David stayed in Virginia, taking a job at a regional pharmaceutical sales company. He bought a house 10 minutes from Mom's place. He had Sunday dinners with her every week. He became her primary support system, or so everyone thought. The calls started about a year after I moved. "Elise, Mom's water heater is broken. Can you chip in $800? I sent the money. "Elise, Mom needs a new roof. It's $4,000. Can we split it? I sent $2,000, even though it wiped out most of my savings. "Elise, Mom's car died. She needs $3,000 for a down payment on a used Honda. I sent the money, putting it on a credit card because my checking account was empty. Every few months, there was something. Always urgent, always necessary, always expensive. And always, David was there, the dutiful son who had supposedly fronted the money and just needed me to pay my share. I never questioned it. How could I? He was taking care of our mother. He was the good child. I was the one who had abandoned Virginia for the bright lights of Chicago, the one who couldn't make it to Sunday dinners, the one who was too busy with my career to visit more than twice a year. Except now, staring at my phone in my office as the cleaning crew started their rounds on our floor, I realized I had been funding something else entirely, and I had no idea how deep it went. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. I spent the day in my apartment, which suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. I made coffee, let it go cold, made more coffee. I paced. I cried. I pulled up my bank statements and credit card bills from the past 5 years and started highlighting every transaction that had anything to do with David or Mom. The numbers were staggering. Between 2020 and now, I had sent over $38,000 to David for various emergencies. $38,000. That was a year's rent. That was a reliable car. That was the beginning of a down payment on a condo. Instead, it had vanished into whatever black hole David had created, and I had smiled and nodded and thanked him for taking such good care of Mom. But that wasn't even the worst part. Around noon, I logged into Mom's bank account. She had given me the login information 2 years ago when she had a minor stroke and needed help managing bills for a few weeks. I had never used it since, trusting David to handle everything. That trust, I was beginning to understand, had been catastrophically misplaced. The account told a different story than the one David had been selling. There were regular automatic withdrawals, every 2 weeks like clockwork, ranging from $200 to $800. All of them were labeled Morgan Holdings LLC. I knew that name. That was David's company, the limited liability corporation he had formed 3 years ago for what he called investment opportunities and tax purposes. Every withdrawal added up. In the past 6 months alone, he had pulled nearly $9,000 from Mom's account. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. I barely made it to the bathroom before I threw up. When the heaving stopped, I sat on the cold tile floor, my back against the bathtub, and tried to understand how this had happened. How had I missed it? How had no one stopped him? Then I remembered. 6 months ago, I had flown back to Virginia for Thanksgiving. Mom seemed frailer than usual, more confused. I had asked David if everything was okay, if her medications were being managed properly. He had smiled that warm, reassuring smile and said, "Everything's under control, Elise. You don't need to worry. You're so busy with your career. I've got this." And I had believed him. Because what kind of person doesn't believe their own brother when he says he's taking care of their aging mother? The kind of person who has been systematically stealing from her, apparently. I spent the next week in a fog. I went to work, sat through meetings, smiled at colleagues, and pretended everything was normal. But every spare moment, I was gathering evidence. I downloaded 5 years of Mom's bank statements. I saved every text message David had ever sent me asking for money. I went through my email and found receipts, Venmo transactions, Zelle payments. I built a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and descriptions. The pattern was undeniable. Every time David told me Mom needed emergency funds, there had actually been no emergency. The water heater? Mom's bank statements showed she had paid a plumber $300 herself. The roof? Never happened. The car? Mom's old Camry was still sitting in her driveway when I visited in July. David had simply invented crises, collected money from me, and pocketed it. And the regular withdrawals to his LLC? Those were pure theft, dressed up in just enough corporate language to look legitimate if anyone glanced at them casually. But I needed more than bank statements. I needed witnesses. I needed proof that would stand up not just to family scrutiny, but potentially to legal scrutiny. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, a small, furious voice was whispering that this might not end with a difficult conversation. This might end in court. On the following Monday, I took a personal day and met with Thomas Keene, an elder law attorney whose office was in the loop. I had found him through a colleague whose mother had been the victim of financial exploitation by a caregiver. Thomas was in his mid-50s, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too many families torn apart by greed. I laid everything out on his conference table. The bank statements, the text messages, the spreadsheet, the voicemail. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. "Miss Morgan," he said carefully, "what your brother is doing is called financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. In Virginia, it's both a civil and criminal matter. If your mother is deemed to lack capacity or is significantly impaired, the penalties are even more severe." "She's not impaired," I said quickly. "She had a small stroke 2 years ago, but she recovered well. She's 71, healthy for her age. She goes to water aerobics twice a week." "Does she manage her own finances?" I hesitated. "David does most of it. She gets confused by the online banking." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's called a position of trust. If David has access to her accounts and is using that access to benefit himself rather than her, that's a breach of fiduciary duty." He paused. "This is serious, Miss Morgan. You need to understand that if you pursue this, your family may never recover. But if you don't pursue it, your mother could lose everything she has. That house you mentioned? If she needs nursing home care in the next 5 years and her assets have been depleted, she won't qualify for Medicaid because they'll count the missing money as improper transfers. She could become destitute." The word hung in the air like a curse. Destitute. My mother, who had worked as a teacher for 35 years, who had scrimped and saved, who had raised 2 children alone after my father died, could end up penniless because her son had decided her money was his for the taking. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Thomas leaned forward. "First, we need more evidence. Medical records showing her competency, witness statements from people who have observed David's behavior or suspicious transactions. Bank statements from David's personal accounts, if you can get them. Anything that shows a pattern of financial mismanagement or outright theft. Second, we need to secure your mother's assets before David can move them. That means getting power of attorney, or better yet, setting up a trust with an independent trustee. Third, you need to prepare yourself for war, Miss Morgan, because that's what this will be. I left his office with a list of tasks and a sense of grim determination. The sister who had spent 32 years trying to keep the peace, trying not to rock the boat, trying to be easy and uncomplicated and convenient, was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who had finally learned that kindness without boundaries is just an invitation to be exploited. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a person I barely recognized. I drove to Virginia twice, telling Mom I was just checking in. The first time, I waited until she was at water aerobics and used my key to enter her house. My hands shook as I photographed documents. The deed to the house, her insurance policies, her pension statements, her social security paperwork. I found her will in a desk drawer. David was the executor and sole beneficiary. I was mentioned exactly once, in a line that read, "To my daughter Sarah, I leave my mother's pearl necklace." Everything else, the house, the savings, the life insurance, went to David. I stood in her quiet living room, surrounded by photos of both of us smiling as children, and felt something inside me calcify into cold fury. This wasn't just theft. This was erasure. The second visit, I was more strategic. I took Mom out to lunch at her favorite seafood restaurant overlooking the James River. While she was in the restroom, I called her bank from my phone using her account number and requested detailed transaction histories going back 7 years, the maximum they would provide without a subpoena. They emailed me PDFs within an hour. I also stopped by her church, where she had been a member for 40 years. The treasurer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ruth Patterson who had known our family since I was born, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. "I always wondered about those donations," Ruth said after I explained what I was investigating. She stirred her tea slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Your brother would come in every few months with a check from your mother's account, always for the building fund or missions, usually $500, sometimes $1,000. But Helen never mentioned it. She's usually so proud when she contributes to the church. I even asked her about it once, and she looked confused. She said she thought David had been donating his own money. Would you be willing to write a statement saying that?" I asked. Ruth didn't hesitate. "Yes, Helen is a good woman. If David is taking advantage of her, someone needs to stop him." I collected 3 more statements over the next week. Mom's visiting nurse, who confirmed that David had insisted on being reimbursed in cash for medications that were actually covered by Medicare. A neighbor who had seen David loading furniture from Mom's garage into a truck, claiming he was taking it to storage but never returning it. The manager at Mom's bank branch, who printed out certified copies of every questionable transaction and admitted, off the record, that he had always thought something was odd about David's access to Helen's accounts. By the time I was finished, I had a file 3 inches thick. Bank statements, witness affidavits, photographs, medical records from Mom's doctor, confirming she was cognitively intact, and Thomas's legal analysis outlining exactly what laws David had broken. I had built a case that could send my brother to prison, but I didn't want him in prison. I wanted my mother safe. I wanted her to see who David really was. And I wanted him to understand that I was done being the doormat he had walked on for 32 years. Thomas advised me to confront Mom first, before David had any warning. He suggested neutral ground, somewhere David couldn't interrupt or control the narrative. I chose a small bed and breakfast in Virginia Beach, a 2-hour drive from Williamsburg. I told Mom I wanted to take her on a weekend trip, just the 2 of us, a chance to relax and talk. She was delighted. She packed a small suitcase and chattered about how nice it would be to see the ocean in October. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The weather was perfect, crisp and clear, the Atlantic stretching out in endless blue. We had dinner at a quiet seafood restaurant, walked on the beach, watched the sunset. Mom seemed more relaxed than I had seen her in years. That night, back in our adjoining rooms at the inn, I almost lost my nerve. She looked so happy, so peaceful. Who was I to shatter that peace? But then I thought about the numbers. 38,000 from me, at least 15,000 from her own accounts, probably more that I hadn't uncovered yet. The house she loved, the security she had earned, all of it slowly being siphoned away by the son she trusted most. If I said nothing, she would have nothing. David would see to that. On Saturday evening, after a day of walking the boardwalk and eating ice cream like we were tourists, I asked Mom if we could talk. We sat in the small sitting room of the inn, a fire crackling in the fireplace even though it wasn't quite cold enough to need it. I pulled out my phone. "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need you to listen to something." I played David's voicemail, all 27 seconds of it. "Sarah is too careless and unreliable. If you want to protect your assets, you need to transfer everything to me. I'll manage it all. She doesn't have the capacity. Mom's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a tight, controlled blankness that I had seen her wear before, usually when other people had disappointed her. But never when thinking about David. He didn't mean it like that, she said after a long pause. David can exaggerate when he's worried. You know how he is. Mom, there's more. I pulled out the binder I had prepared, the one Thomas had helped me organize. Bank statements with highlighted sections, witness statements notarized and official, a timeline showing every time David had asked me for money under false pretenses, a chart showing the regular withdrawals from her account to his LLC. I laid it all out on the coffee table between us, page after page after page. Evidence that couldn't be explained away with a younger son's protective instincts or a misunderstanding. Mom read through it slowly. I watched her face as comprehension dawned, then horror, then a deep, aching sadness that made me want to gather it all up and pretend it wasn't real. But it was real. David had stolen from her. From both of us. For years. When she reached the last page, a summary sheet showing the total financial damage, she closed the binder carefully and placed both hands on top of it, as if to keep it from flying open again. He's my son, she whispered. I can't just cut him off. I'm not asking you to, I said, and I meant it. I didn't want to destroy David. I just wanted him to stop destroying us. I'm asking you to see the truth. I'm asking you to protect yourself. I have a lawyer, Mom. His name is Thomas Keene. He specializes in elder law. He can help us set up a trust, something with oversight, so this never happens again. And David? David will have to explain himself. To you, to me, to the bank, if necessary. But first, you need to be safe. Mom sat in silence for what felt like an hour but was probably only a few minutes. The fire popped and hissed. Somewhere outside, I could hear the ocean, steady and indifferent. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were red but dry. I need time to think. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a crack in the wall David had built, and I would take it. We drove back to Williamsburg on Sunday afternoon. Mom was quiet, staring out the window at the passing Virginia countryside. I didn't push. I had said what I needed to say. The rest was up to her. On Monday, Thomas received a call from Mom's doctor, who confirmed that he was willing to testify that Helen Morgan was of sound mind and capable of making her own decisions. On Tuesday, the bank manager emailed me a formal letter stating that he would cooperate with any investigation into the Morgan Holdings LLC withdrawals. On Wednesday, Ruth from the church sent me a copy of her signed affidavit. On Thursday, David called me. I was at work, in the middle of a design review meeting. I excused myself and took the call in an empty conference room, my heart pounding. What the hell did you say to Mom? His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the fury underneath. I told her the truth. You told her lies. You manipulated her. She's upset, Elise. She's confused. You have no idea what you've done. I showed her the bank statements, David. Your bank statements. The ones showing you've been stealing from her. There was a pause. Then his voice changed, became smoother, more cajoling. It's not stealing. I've been managing her money. She asked me to. She trusts me. Did she ask you to transfer thousands of dollars to your LLC? Did she ask you to lie to me about emergencies that didn't exist? Did she ask you to try to have her declare me incompetent so you could take everything? You don't understand the complexities of elder care, Elise. You're never here. You don't see the day-to-day expenses, the stress, the time I put in. I deserve compensation. Then you should have been honest about it. You should have discussed it with both of us. Instead, you lied and stole and tried to push me out. He was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice was cold. You've made a mistake. A big one. Mom will side with me. She always does. And when this is over, you'll be the one who's pushed out. He hung up. I stood in the conference room, looking out at Chicago's skyline, and realized I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, David's anger didn't make me want to shrink or apologize or backtrack. Let him be angry. I had the truth on my side. The confrontation David predicted came 2 weeks later. He orchestrated it carefully, as he always did. He invited the whole family to lunch at a upscale Italian restaurant in Richmond, halfway between Williamsburg and my cousin Jessica's house in Short Pump. It was supposed to be a celebration of his promotion to regional sales director. Mom, me, Jessica, and her husband Mark, our Aunt Linda, and Uncle George all sat around a large table in a private dining room. David was in his element, charming and attentive. He ordered wine, made toasts, told funny stories about his pharmaceutical clients. He was the golden boy again, basking in the attention. Then, about halfway through the meal, he turned serious. I want to talk about Mom's care, he said, his hand resting on her shoulder in a gesture that looked protective but suddenly seemed possessive to me. She's getting older. She needs more support. I've been handling most of it, but it's a lot. I'm concerned about her finances, her health, everything. He glanced at me, his expression carefully neutral. Sarah has been helpful when she can be, but she's so busy with her career in Chicago. She's stressed. She's been having some paranoid thoughts lately. She thinks there are problems with Mom's accounts, but it's just confusion. Stress, probably. Every head at the table turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes, see the concern and the questions forming. This was David's move, the one where he painted me as unstable, where he made my evidence sound like delusion. I reached into my bag and pulled out a smaller version of the binder I had shown Mom. Aunt Linda, who was sitting closest to me, watched with curious eyes. "David's right that I've been stressed," I said calmly. "Finding out your brother has been stealing from your mother will do that." I opened the binder and pulled out 3 documents. Bank statements with David's LLC withdrawals highlighted in yellow, Ruth's notarized affidavit from the church, and a letter from the bank manager confirming the transactions. I placed them in the center of the table. These are certified bank records. They show regular withdrawals from Mom's account to David's company, nearly $15,000 in the past 18 months alone. Here's a statement from the church treasurer saying David made large donations in Mom's name without her knowledge. And here's a letter from the bank confirming that these transactions were never authorized in writing by Mom. The silence was deafening. Jessica picked up the bank statements, her eyes scanning the highlighted sections. Mark leaned over to read them too. Aunt Linda's expression shifted from confusion to shock. David's face flushed red. "This is manipulation. Sarah has always been jealous. She's always resented that I'm the one here, taking care of things. She doesn't understand real responsibility." "Then explain the transactions," I said, my voice still calm. "Explain why you told me Mom needed $4,000 for a new roof when she never got a new roof. Explain why you told me her car died when it's still sitting in her driveway. Explain why you've been withdrawing money from her account without proper authorization. I've been paying expenses. I've been covering things. You don't see what I deal with every day." "Then you should have receipts, invoices, documentation. Where are they, David?" He didn't have an answer. His hand, which had been resting on Mom's shoulder, fell away. She was staring at him with an expression I had never seen her direct at him before. Not anger exactly. Something worse. Disappointment. "David," she said quietly, "is this true?" "Mom, it's not what it looks like. I can explain." "Is it true?" Her voice was firmer now. He opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his life, David had no smooth answer, no charming deflection. The mask had slipped, and everyone at the table could see what was underneath. "I was going to pay it back," he finally said. "It was just temporary. I had some investments that didn't pan out. I needed bridge financing. I was going to replace it all." "You stole from her," Aunt Linda said flatly. "You stole from your own mother." David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. You're all being manipulated by Sarah. She's been trying to turn you against me for years. She's jealous, she's bitter, and she can't stand that I'm the one Mom depends on." "Then prove us wrong," I said. "Show us your bank statements. Show us receipts for all the expenses you say you covered. Show us evidence that you were acting in Mom's best interest." He stared at me, and for a second, I saw real hatred flash across his face. Then he grabbed his coat and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving his phone on the table and his meal unfinished. No one followed him. That, more than anything, told me the truth had landed. David had spent his whole life being the one everyone ran after, the one everyone tried to appease. Not this time. The aftermath moved faster than I expected. Thomas Keene filed a petition with the circuit court to freeze David's access to Mom's accounts and to appoint a guardian ad litem to review the financial situation. Within a week, the judge granted a temporary restraining order. David couldn't withdraw a penny from any of Mom's accounts pending a full investigation. The bank, eager to avoid liability, cooperated fully. They provided 7 years of detailed records, including internal memos where a junior compliance officer had flagged the Morgan Holdings LLC withdrawals as potentially suspicious, but had been overruled by a manager who knew our family socially. That manager was quietly placed on administrative leave. David hired a lawyer, a slick guy from Richmond who specialized in defending white-collar crimes. He tried to argue that Mom had verbally authorized everything, that this was a family dispute being blown out of proportion, but Thomas had done his homework. We had Ruth's affidavit, the nurse's statement, the neighbor's testimony. We had bank records that showed a clear pattern. We had Mom's own testimony, given voluntarily and videotaped with her doctor present to confirm her competency. The final hearing was in early December, in a courthouse in Williamsburg that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970 seconds. David showed up in an expensive suit, looking confident. But his confidence faded as Thomas methodically presented evidence, bank statements, witness testimony. A forensic accountant's report showing that at least $52,000 had been transferred out of Mom's accounts over 5 years, with no corresponding benefit to her. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened impassively. When Thomas finished, she turned to David's lawyer. "Counsel, do you have any evidence that your client acted with proper authorization and in the best interest of his mother?" David's lawyer stood up, shuffled some papers, and essentially admitted he didn't. He tried to argue that David had intended to repay everything, that it was a family loan, that Mom had benefited from his presence and care. The judge cut him off. "Mr. Morgan," she said, looking directly at David, "you occupied a position of trust with respect to your mother. You had access to her financial accounts. You used that access to enrich yourself. Whether you intended to repay the funds is irrelevant. You stole from a vulnerable adult. I'm ordering you to make full restitution of $52,000 within 90 days. Additionally, I'm removing you from any position of authority over your mother's finances, medical decisions, or estate. You are prohibited from contacting her except through counsel until restitution is made." David's face went white. His lawyer tried to object, to argue for a payment plan, but the judge was done. She signed the order and moved on to the next case. Outside the courthouse, David caught up with me in the parking lot. His expensive suit looked rumpled now, his confident facade completely gone. "Are you happy?" he said. His voice was raw, broken. "You got what you wanted. You destroyed our family." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "You did. The day you decided Mom's money was yours to take. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. You didn't have to do this." "How much time, David? Another year? 5 years? When were you going to stop?" I shook my head. "Mom needed someone to protect her. Since you weren't going to do it, I did." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not remorse exactly. More like the realization that I wasn't the little sister he could manipulate anymore. "You've changed," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I just stopped pretending we were people we're not." I walked away. It should have felt triumphant, but it mostly just felt sad. 32 years of a relationship, gone. But maybe it had always been gone. Maybe I was just finally seeing clearly. Mom moved forward with Thomas's recommendation to create a trust. All her assets, the house, her retirement accounts, her savings, went into the Helen Morgan Irrevocable Trust, overseen by 2 independent trustees, Thomas and a financial advisor from Richmond who specialized in elder care. Mom retained full control of her day-to-day expenses, but any large withdrawals or changes required both trustees' approval. David's name was removed from everything. The house was the hardest part. It was the place where she had raised us, where Dad had planted those azalea bushes, where every room held memories. But it was also where David had felt entitled to help himself to whatever he wanted. Thomas recommended she sell it and move into a smaller, more manageable place. After a lot of discussion, Mom agreed. I flew back to Virginia in February to help her pack. We sorted through 4 decades of accumulated life: photo albums, furniture, my old report cards, David's football trophies. Mom was quiet most of the time, but occasionally she would pick up something and tell me a story. The Christmas ornaments Dad had carved from wood, the quilt her mother had made, the recipe box full of index cards in faded handwriting. "Do you hate him?" she asked me one evening. We were sitting on the floor of her living room, surrounded by boxes. I said honestly, "I'm angry. I'm hurt. But I don't hate him. I just can't trust him." "I raised him better than this," she said softly. "I don't know where I went wrong." "You didn't go wrong, Mom. David made his own choices." She nodded, but I could see she didn't really believe it. Parents rarely do. Mom moved into a tidy townhouse in a retirement community about 20 minutes from Williamsburg. It had a small garden where she planted new azaleas, as bright and hopeful as the ones Dad had planted 40 years ago. She joined the community's book club and water aerobics program. She started volunteering at the local elementary school, reading to first graders. She seemed, if not happy, then at least at peace. David made the first restitution payment in March, on the deadline the judge had set. It was $52,000 exactly, wired from an account I didn't recognize. He made no attempt to contact Mom or me. His lawyer sent a terse letter confirming the payment and requesting that the restraining order be modified to allow limited supervised contact. Mom declined. She said she wasn't ready. As for me, I went back to Chicago and tried to rebuild my life. The Riverside Development Project was completed in April to rave reviews. I was promoted to senior architect, a position I had been working toward for 5 years. I bought a small condo in Lincoln Park with a view of the lake. It was mine, paid for with my own money, and no one could take it from me. But Chicago didn't feel like home anymore. Maybe it never had. It had been a place to run to, a place to build a career and prove I was more than just David's forgettable little sister. But it was cold and anonymous, and I was tired of being cold. In June, I gave my notice at Morrison & Blake. My boss was shocked. He offered me a raise, a corner office, a promise of partnership in 2 years. I thanked him and declined.